Hi, I'm Gabriela Sanchez Soto, a research analyst here at HERC. Thank you for joining me as I present results about our research on school year mobility in the Houston area. In this presentation, we look at the question, what are the key predictors of campus level rates of school year mobility in 2013-2017? In our presentation, we will review key terms, describe how we looked at mobility, discuss significant predictors of mobility, summarize our findings, and discuss some takeaways. The outcome of interest in our analysis is the total school year mobility rate, which is defined as the number of students per 100 students at a campus that enter or exit that campus during a given school year. For instance, a campus with a total school year mobility rate of 10 means that for every 100 students at the campus, 10 students entered or exited the campus during the school year. Now, let me tell you a little bit about how we looked at mobility for this study. First, our goal was to identify which factors are associated with campus mobility rates. Next, we identified four main buckets of factors: student body characteristics, neighborhood factors, campus factors, and alternative options. All of these characteristics were taken into consideration in our analysis. I will discuss them in more detail ahead in the presentation. Lastly, we identified which of these factors are most associated with mobility rates so that we can provide you with a better idea of how supports and resources might be allocated. Now let me return to those four buckets of factors. They comprise the story we looked at for the Houston area. Each of these buckets includes a variety of factors. Student body characteristics for each campus included the proportion of students receiving free or reduced price lunch, those with limited English proficiency, those who are Black or Asian, as well as the mobility rate in the previous year for that campus. Campus features included whether the campus had a magnet program, achievement scores, size of student body, the average years of teacher experience, school suspension rates, and grade level. Alternative options include the number of charter, private, and regular schools within a 10-minute drive of campus. Lastly, neighborhood factors included average parental education, type of household, language spoken at home, employment, home ownership, and poverty rates. Now, let us review the results for the Houston area. In our presentation, we will only show results that were statistically significant. This graph shows the relationship between school year mobility in the previous year and current school year mobility for the 2013-2017 period. The horizontal axis shows the mobility rate in the previous year, and the vertical axis shows the current mobility rate. Every dot represents one campus, and the line shows the relationship between these two variables. What we see here is that schools with higher school year mobility in one year tend to have higher school year mobility rate in the next year. This means that on average, every 1 point change in mobility in the previous year is associated to a 0.8 change in current mobility. So, for instance, if mobility in the previous year was 50 students per 100, in the current year, mobility would be estimated to be 42 students per 100. Across all of our analysis, the relationship between these two factors is the strongest and most consistent. In the next few slides, we will show you which other factors also influence mobility. This graph shows the average predicted school year mobility rates by level of Index 1 STAAR scores. All of these effects are significant. We use the blue bar to highlight the categories with the highest value. We find that schools with lower Index 1 scores have the highest rates of school year mobility. So, schools in the lowest 20% of the Index 1 distribution have a mobility rate of 21 students per 100, while the highest 20% of the Index 1 score distribution on the other side of the graph has a mobility rate of 19 per 100. Another significant predictor was the proportion of Black students on campus. We see that schools with higher proportions of Black students have higher school year mobility rates, and that campuses with lower proportions of Black students have lower proportions of school year mobility rates. We also find that campuses with magnet programs have lower school year mobility rates compared to campuses without magnet programs. Even though this is a statistically significant difference, it is not a substantively meaningful one, as the numerical differences between these two categories are very small. We also find that neighborhoods with higher levels of poverty have higher mobility rates. However, this effect is not substantive, as the differences across level of poverty are very small, despite being statistically significant. Next, we find that campuses with more private schools nearby have higher mobility rates. However, differences across categories are small and not as meaningful, though the differences are statistically significant. Lastly, campuses with higher average years of teacher experience had higher rates of school year mobility compared to campuses with lower average teacher experience. This effect is not substantively meaningful, though it is significant as well. These are the factors that matter for the Houston area. We see that characteristics across all four buckets are significant predictors of school year mobility, though their effect varies in magnitude. Let's recap our findings. In the student body bucket, we found that school year mobility rates in the previous year are the strongest predictor of current mobility rates, and that schools with higher proportions of Black students have higher rates of school year mobility. In the neighborhood factors bucket, we found that higher levels of poverty in the neighborhood are associated to higher mobility. Regarding the campus features bucket, we found that schools with magnet programs have lower levels of mobility, while schools with lower index 1-star scores have higher levels of mobility. Lastly, in the alternative options bucket, more private schools in the area are related to higher rates of mobility. From these findings, there are a few takeaways. The first is, a campus history of mobility is the strongest and most consistent predictor of current mobility. We might want to explore this relationship further in future research to better understand what's behind a campus's history of school year mobility. Next, student, campus, and neighborhood characteristics, including the availability of alternative options, all influence mobility rates, though to a lesser extent than a history of mobility. Finally, although our analysis does not answer why students move, it does give us an idea of the context in which mobility is happening. The characteristics found to be influencing mobility can help inform our decisions about resources and future interventions. Thank you for your attention. Please take note of our contact information and reach out if you have any questions or suggestions moving forward.